All right. So what we're going to do right now is we'll just continue, with the private fields. Basically what we have here. Um, okay. So if you also have any question as regards yesterday's session, please go ahead and drop it in the chat. Someone is still joining, so let me admit that person. Okay. All right. Okay, so let's start by understanding what private fields are. I'm going to open up this project in my Visual Studio Code. I think I currently have Visual Studio Code open, but I have to close this project. And by the way, what I'm working on here. This is a front end for a backend that I deployed, and I'm sure maybe you saw that. When you came in, if you came in early, you saw this page. I'm going to be closing this as well, by the way. But yeah. So yeah, so this is so the idea is that we're trying to have this workshop page, right? We're not done. Basically, this is just a very simple test. So it's a different. It's kind of like it's a decoupled application from the main website, though it has the same navigation, footer, and all that. But we're trying to do it in such a way that anyone can simply join our workshop by just clicking on join. This is supposed to be a workshop. By just clicking on join workshop, right? So it will take you straight to the Zoom call. It will take you to the platform we're using for the call, right? And we are also almost done with our own live call platform, our integration. So you can see we have that here, live stream. So hopefully before the end of this month, we'll start using it for some workshops. Not all workshop. We'll start using it for some of our workshop. And yeah, so right now we can work with the API. We can create our own calls and all that. And it has a very rich environment for learning. It has a couple of plugins that would make the experience much better. So that's the idea. All right, so let's go back to the. I'll close this for now, and yeah. So I'm simply going to navigate to this folder, right? Or I can just open this up like this by just dragging and dropping. So if you have your terminal, most of you probably work with Windows. I would advise if you can probably switch to Linux. But if you cannot switch to Linux, go ahead and download Git Bash, and I believe you can also do some of the things I'm doing with my terminal, right? So it's nice to learn how to use the terminal. I've said this several times. I'm not going to stress on this. I'm not going to stress on using the terminal on this call. But let us see what we have here, and let's open this with Visual Studio Code. So I have I have 8 of you on this call basically. So I hope the others are able to see the link on time. So this is my Visual Studio Code, and I believe you can see it. I'm simply going to add my terminal here side by side so that we can run from this terminal. We can also use the embedded terminal. It doesn't matter. And we're going to create a new file, right? So which means I can also create that file from here by simply saying touch, and the name of that file will be private fields. So let's talk about private fields.js, right? Okay. So let's open that private fields.js. So basically, what are private fields in JavaScript, right? So you want a situation where you are able to have some fields inside your class, and you don't want people to be able to just call that file and probably edit it randomly directly by calling the class. So instead, what you might want to do is to say, okay, I want this particular value to be. I mean, I want anybody to be able to. I want any function within this class to have access to edit this particular value. But I don't want that value to be like accessed randomly by any caller. Instead, I want to be able to create a kind of like a getter and setter um, function for performing these operations. Please give me 1 minute. 1 minute, please. Okay, yeah, sorry about that. Okay, so what we're going to do right now is we're going to create a very simple private field, and I'm going to show you how to define. So let's assume we have I like working with employees, right? So let's say we have a class of employee, and then we have our constructor, and within the constructor we have the employee name. Now, let's assume this is the only value we have. This is what we'll do on a regular basis. We'll say this dot employee name equals employee name, right? Okay, but now we want to make this private, and we want to make this private. In order to make this private, what we are going to do is to say we have the I'm going to call the employee name, just like this. And then in order to access that private value, I'm going to access it this way, right? With the hash, just before the employee name. And yeah, so let's go ahead and see how we can use this. I'm going to create a new instance. I'll call this John equals employee, new employee. Remember, new employee, and we should have the name, right? So let's say the name is John Doe. Okay, so let's try something. If I say console.log John.employee name, right? So let's do a node private field. So you see now we're getting undefined, and the question right now is, why are we getting undefined? When we have that employee name and we have John as the as the instance that we have created. Basically, it's because this item is private, and in order for you to in order for you to access this item, you basically need what to call a getter, which I'm going to explain next. I will explain getters and setters. So let's just call this get name, for example, get name, right? And I'm going to say return this dot employee name. Okay. So now when we run John.name, what do we have? There's a problem there, and that problem is so it says it is not a function. Okay, let me change this to employee name just to be sure. Is that correct? Okay, so yeah, this is a getter. Okay, yeah, correct. So I think I see why. Okay, so that was the problem. Let's go back to calling this name just like this, of course. Okay, so sorry, this is a getter, right? So you don't call it like a function. It's basically an attribute, and what it does is you use something like this to access your private fields. So when we ran the dot employee name, we saw it gave us undefined until we're able to work with the getter. Now this is going to lead us to ask that particular question. Why do we really have to make this item private? You're probably building a class in such a way that you don't want people to mistakenly alter the values, right? Probably by changing this John.employee name equals Mary. I don't know if you understand that. If you understand what I mean. You don't want people to be able to do stuff like this. So yeah, so John. Okay, so let's just assume we don't have the private, we don't have these items as a private fields. I'm also going to take this off. Now we created a new employee called John Doe, and now we change the employee name to probably John Mary Doe or something, right? So if we log John.employee name, if we run this, you see now we have Mary Doe. You're able to alter that field, right? Okay, so let's go back to making this private. And now that we've made this private, if we come down here to call our employee name, you see that now we are having Mary. Okay, yeah, so I think this is something I would really want to explain to you. The initial idea is that I said earlier you could not really access this when you call name, and I'm going to explain what just happened here. Basically by calling this, we automatically appended this attribute, and of course this is JavaScript, very dynamic. If we call the name like this, you see we still have John Doe, right? By calling this particular item, we're able to append Mary, directly. So I'm going to save this and run this again. Let's try to print John.employee name again. So you see, we have Mary because we're actually printing. We appended a new instance. Remember, I told you in the previous class that even though this is a class, it's still an object basically. So by adding John.employee name, you are adding employee name to John, automatically. Same way, what if we try to say employee DOB? Let's say 10, 10, 20. Can we print employee DOB? Let's check that. So you see, we can also print employee DOB. Now, JavaScript is very dynamic, and sometimes this can lead to issues. So I don't expect anyone would want to do this, right? Because automatically you are no longer following the rule and the structure of your class, right? And yeah, so many times you might make this mistake. Always try as much as possible to be careful not to append this or append things directly to the class like this. So yeah, so I believe you understood the concept of working with the private fields. When you try to access this directly, it will be difficult to access that value, but instead you can then access that value straight from the name using the getter. Now it's also nice that you append a setter object, and sometimes it's good to even ensure you have your setter and getter this way. The reason for that is because when you then try to alter it this way, I mean it would definitely follow that rule you have here. Because if you want to call this outside, maybe you want to call a setter, so let's say is someone trying to join? Someone have been in the waiting room all this while. Okay, so if you have like a setter, basically what the setter will do, the setter is going to set this value, and I will explain this before I proceed. I will explain this better. So, but you have a getter which is going to be used for getting a value, right? For getting a value, and then you have a setter for setting the value. Okay. So, quick one. If you have any question right now, ask a question. Sorry, if you have any question right now, so I can quickly move on to the getters and setters, and we can cover that before we talk about the private methods. You can unmute yourself. I'll give you just a few seconds to unmute yourself. All right. Okay. So, do you have any question, Efe?
My question is, for this private class, is that how do we know when to use a private class and when to use a private class? Seeing that, let's say you are trying to create a database for an inventory, right? Let's say a phone inventory where you go and you check for the phone, the model, and the make. Can you use a private class for that one, or like there are specific instances you need to have before you use this class?
Okay, so I think there's a mistake here. You said private class, or do you mean private field?
Sorry, private field.
Okay.
Okay. Let's say you have an inventory of phones and accessories. Do you use a private field for that one, or you use the public field?
Well, now it depends on how you want your it depends on how you want to structure a class, right? It's not dependent on it's not like there's a rule or there's a situation where you must use it. It's up to you. Now, when writing your code, from my experience, I will tell you that it's good to ensure that some things are private. And remember that these private things we're talking about is not an issue of the users making mistakes. It's an issue of the developers, or the amount of developers working with this. It's an issue of avoiding mistakes when it comes to the use of these classes, right? Or the invocation of these classes. So if let's say you're building your application, like with the example you gave, and you don't want people to just call these items, right? You don't want people to just call these properties, but basically these are properties, right? You don't want them to just call these properties directly. You don't want them to alter the value inside these properties directly. Then maybe what you might want to do is use private fields, and then you put in the getters and the setters that you would use to always set these fields. Now, most times you will do this because there are some items you don't want people to have direct access to. So let's say you have something like ID, right? And you don't want anybody to just come in here and try to figure out what the ID is. This is private, right? You don't want them to just come in and try to figure. So this is something you want to generate all the time internally, but you don't want someone to always come in here to call employee dot ID and just pick out a value or try to know what the value is. So you might always probably you have something for generating that. You have something that you have a function for generating every single ID. We're going to work with this very soon, anyways. So you have a function for generating this ID. I think if are you trying to join with another device? Can you hear me, Ife?
Yes, I'm trying to join with my laptop.
Okay. Yeah. So let's say you don't want someone to just call this directly. You can make this a private field. The idea is you're trying to encapsulate this data in such a way that you just want to hide this data and you don't want this data to be open to the programmers or the developers. And most times you would want to do this because it's not because the developers will be able to see this. This is going to be abstracted probably in a different file, already compiled in such a way that all the developer can do is import this, in a different file, because the developers will not have access to this. So you've created this already, mostly when you're writing a library or something. You already have like that employee library, and all they have to do is to import employee, from, and we'll get to working with things like this. So import employee from maybe employee JS, right? And when they import employee, all they can now do is to create a new employee, right? So when you are creating a new employee, by default the ID will be generated on the background. They don't really need to know how it's happening, and you don't want them to easily know that particular ID by just running console.log john.id. Yeah? I don't know if you get my point. Ife, do you understand me?
Understand.
Okay.
Yes.
Do you have another question?
Okay, last question, John. So if you want to set a field private, I just have to put this hash symbol behind the class or behind the property I want to make private.
Yeah. That's how you do that in JavaScript. Yeah.
So I have a question.
Okay, go ahead and ask your question, please.
Yes, you explained the concept of using private fields, and from my understanding, it seems that when you have a private field, it can be accessed directly by a programmer or a developer from working with the code. So my question now is, what is the essence of having the private field if you can have getters and setters by which you can include the value of the private keys as well?
Okay, so your question is, what is the essence of having a private field if you can have, or if you will have, I don't know. So, but you mean if you can have getters and setters to make them public or to get them, right?
Yes.
So now it's all about having a well constructed. So you can mute yourself. Okay. So it's all about having a well constructed code, right? So for example, we have a private field that I call UUID. This UUID would not work, so because we have not installed that library. So instead, what I'm going to do is to just call. I'm going to do it this way. So I'm going to just call UUID, and then basically I'm going to put a function, UUID. So I want to use this example to explain something to you. So now I have UUID and I return. Let's say I'm just going to return, just something random, right? Something random. So this is going to be more like an ID when we create a new item. So now that we're calling this, and this is private, you remember that by default, the way it would work when you're constructing this is you don't want the developers to alter this because you already created this in such a way that they will not be able to alter the value or alter what goes in here. Now we are not creating getters and setters for this, except you want to. Now the moment you create getters and setters for this, okay, it makes more sense because now you know that when they are trying to alter the value of this item, they are going through a well-defined pattern, which is what you have created to say, okay, this is how we can set the value of this, this stuff. Not necessarily by calling that setter the ID, but instead we can call that setter maybe, let's say, set ID, right? Now, if I say set ID for example, right? If I say set ID, I'm going to simply, so let's see. So I'm going to also call this get employee name. So yeah, I have a set ID, but I think I should. Okay, so let me just call this ID. And what I'm going to do here is to say, probably I'll just say this.id. So we can always do this. We can always do this.id, equals. So we're setting a particular value, and let me just call this as well, right? So basically, I'm just calling this item 2. Okay. So now the thing that you would really understand that I'm trying to do here is we are building a very well constructed interface. We are basically working with this ID, but no one has access to like grabbing the information from this ID. Only the core developer of this class understands what is happening here, and probably we don't want anybody to just come in here and call the instance of the employee, .id, and like change the value automatically and allow that value to take effect here. You understand? Instead, we must always go through this particular, well-constructed means by setting ID. So it's possible that we want them to set an ID, and the ID they give us, we would always append it to whatever is generated from here. So for example, we can say plus ID, right? So the ID they give to us, we, sorry, not like this, okay, plus ID, okay? Take this plus. Okay, so it's possible that this is what we want. We have our own fixed, values, and we don't want this to. We don't want them to have access to whatever is happening here, right? So we want to always, set this value by, doing something, something similar, and also taking this off, right? Maybe taking that off. Okay, so this would always give us a particular item, and this will be set, right? But the only way we can set this is through this interface, through this class. This person cannot call this item and just change it. You understand? We have something, we have a particular flow, we have a particular, pattern that we are working with, and by calling this, you are able to do it this way. Now, most times you will not see people, using set ID. Instead, they will just like, set the ID, right? But I'm just giving you an instance to say that it's possible to have something that is private, and you don't want anybody to just, come in here and, access that particular item. Instead, we want them to follow, a well-defined structure, a well-defined structure to do that. And I'm surprised why we just have 10 minutes left, so we have to leave and come back. But maybe once it's like 2 minutes, 2 minutes left. So I'm just giving you an instance. This is the kind of scenario, and I said most times you would want to do things this way when you have. When you are probably building a kind of library that will be reused, right? Or maybe you are writing a kind of code that you don't want multiple developers to work on this same class and then make the mistake of changing things that they are not meant to change, or they are not even meant to touch or access, right? And that's basically all I'm trying to explain here. So yeah. So do you understand that, Mohammed?
Yes, I understand very well. Thank you, sir.
Okay. So now we have the getters and setters. So let me work with let me take this off from here because I don't want to. I want to share this with you. I think someone else has a question, right? Or you can unmute yourself, Jeremiah. I think you're just joining. Okay, so I'm cleaning this up because yeah, let's see. So this is giving us undefined because we're trying to access. Okay, let's do it this way. Undefined. Okay, so good. So this is now a private field, right? We cannot access this except we have like a getter for getting that value, right? So I don't want to put the getter in here, but I believe you would understand that. So instead, let's create a new file. I'll call this getSets.js. Okay. So inside the getSet.js, we'll still use like the employee class, but this time around we're going to have like getter for employee name, and this is going to get this item for us. So then we also have the setter for the employee name, and we're going to have let's call this a new employee name. Okay, then we'll say right. So what do we do here? Okay, so basically let me explain this first. So basically we have a private field here. And of course, it's not compulsory. It must be private all the time before you can use getters and setters. But it makes more sense, that you have something private and then you have getters and setters for, constructing. You don't want someone to just come and say John dot, this, and they're accessing this directly. Instead, you want to create a well-defined interface that they will use for that. So we have get, we have set, and so let's say when they try to get the employee name, basically what you're going to do is return this okay, employee name. All right, and when they try to set, what you're going to do is to just simply say this dot employee name equals new employee name. So let's try to work with this. So now we have a new employee with the employee name, and by default this is the employee name, right? So next we're going to just say John dot employee name, and now we are using this to get this item. So let's do okay, we already have that, so we already have console log John dot employee name. So now we are using the getter right here. Here we just created a new instance. Okay, so now we're using the getter, and in order to use the setter, we're going to say using the setter. So basically what we're going to do is to say John dot employee name equals okay, so John dot employee name. I think we can just put this, let's say John Mary, or let's say Hogan Mary. Let's go back and get the employee name again. Let's see what we have with this. So I'm going to call this this is get set, right? Okay, so now we have a problem which is saying it's not a function. So instead I'm going to do it this way. See if that fixes the problem. Okay, Hogan Mary. All right. So yeah. So basically what we've been able to do this is using the getter to get the item, and then this is using the setter to set the item, right? John dot employee name. And by calling this, we're basically calling the setter. So I think we still have someone in the waiting room. What we're going to do right now is talk about private methods. So we have understood how to use the getters and setters. It looks very similar. I mean, you'll be asking yourself, what's the point of using this? I mean, this is very close to just calling these items directly and altering the values. First off, altering values that way, especially when it comes to your class variables, is not a good practice. And of course, we're just trying to understand best practices here. It's not a good practice in the sense that when you have multiple people altering these values, or when you start making mistakes of creating new items or creating new properties, or calling the wrong properties, it's no longer, I mean, it can be stressful as a programmer to make these tiny mistakes, these silly mistakes, and you might think it's not a big deal to work with getters and setters, but when you start working with multiple developers on the same project, I believe then you will realize that sometimes it's good to use these basic constructs like getters, setters, and private fields. Or sometimes you might just decide to transition into working with TypeScript, which is what most developers do. But it's good to understand like how this thing work. So if you notice, most times I personally don't even remember the exact way to do some of these things, because I prefer to probably use TypeScript, right, instead of having to always pass through this stress. But knowing how it works, I understand the functionality, and if I am in the position to work on someone else's code, right, I would know the best way to probably refactor their code, or to make their code look better than the current states. So I believe you understand that. So yeah, let's talk about private methods before I think I can quickly. Okay, so basically private methods is also similar to very similar to the private fields, and the idea is you only want other methods, you only want other methods to be able to like call these methods. You want it to be private, and you don't want any other item or any other class to just call this particular private method. So an example of working with a private method, I am going to. I think Robert is having a network issue. We have private method. Okay, so now we have a private field here. Let's assume we have two private fields. So for the employee record, we have employee name and the employee department, for example. Okay, and within the constructor, we are expecting the employee name and the employee department. And then right here, we're going to do something similar. So I'm going to pick the employee department and just paste that in. Let me drop this a little bit. Okay. All right. So for our getters and setters, we can always use this. So we can always duplicate this and set the employee department, right? Department, new employee department. Okay. So this dot employee department. Okay, good. So now we have the getter and setters for the employee departments and all that. Commenting your code is always going to help you as well. Now we're going to create a private method. So what I want you to do, basically, we're going to have a private method, and the private method, of course, can only be accessed within the class. You can't access that private method outside the class. You can't access the private method even in a subclass. It has to be just within this particular class. So we're going to create a private method, and I call that merge details. So within this private method, we're going to simply return a template literal saying that this employee is in this department, right? So what we're simply going to do is, let me see, someone is trying to join. So what we're simply going to do is to say, we're going to return this dot employee name, just like this, is in this dot employee department, right? And we're going to wrap this up in a template literal and ensure we have something like this and like this. Okay, so let's put everything together within a literal, a template literal. So now we have the employee name, which is John Doe, is in this department. So we can just have is in the department, right? So something like this. So let's say we have that employee name and department of the IT, IT department. So now merge details cannot be accessed outside. So what we have to do to show this value, to show what we've done here, we're simply going to have show details. And show details is going to return, let's just call merge details, right? So it will give us this dot merge details. Now we can access this particular method from this method, right? They are both in the class, but if you try to call this outside the class, it's not going to work. So why would you want to do something like this, right? Basically, you're building an application, and you want to create a particular method for performing some kind of computation, maybe like a finance application, and you want to be able to please mute yourself, Robert. Mute yourself. You want to be able to perform a computation like probably check user record. You want to check user record, or you want to make a payment, or you want to like do something related to money, the business logic. But at the same time, you don't want developers making the mistake of calling that particular method directly for some reasons, right? You want to make it private. Then you have a public one where they can pass in some details, and then within the public one, you can say, okay, check, for defaults, to check if there's some default parameters that were passed in. Then you say, okay, check if the values are safe, to be passed on, to be passed for computation, right? So you do all these checks in here before calling this other item, and yeah, this is private, so you're sure that whatever comes in here is already verified and validated by some other method, right? This is just basically how to create the private methods. Let's go ahead and test what we've done here. Basically, we created a new employee, and then we want to show details just like this. Okay, so in order to run this, I'm going to call private, not private, but private methods. Okay, so now this is giving us a function, and yeah, so the basic reason, the reason why this is giving us a function is because we did not execute this. So let's see, yeah, so just in case you make that kind of mistake, and you're trying to return, now you're returning a function in itself, but the function was not called, right? So you always remember to make sure you add something like this, the open and close parentheses, to execute that function. So now we have John Doe is in the IT department. Yeah, so I believe you understand why we are working with this, and how to use the private methods. Okay, so I think finally we've been able to cover some of these things. if you have any other questions as regards classes, always feel free to ask in the room, in the Discord server, and I'll definitely attend to you. Please, favor, mute yourself. If you have any question, you can go ahead or mute yourself and ask a question right now before we move on to the next thing on our list. So ask a question right now if you have any, please. So someone is asking, can a class contain multiple functions? So I think what you mean multiple methods, So sometimes it's always good to ensure you're not making those mistakes. I understand what you mean. This is a function, but since it's within a class, it's a method. A class can contain like as many, methods as you want, right? So yes, of course it can. So if you have other questions, please ask. Okay. You can also unmute yourself and ask so that we can proceed. Let's move on to. So someone is saying, please show line 31 down. Okay. Unmute. Okay. So if you have any other question, unmute yourself and ask, or we can move on to talk about Node, Npm, and NVM. All right. So let's proceed then. Okay, so Anita, are you copying this code? Because I'm going to share this code with you. So I'm moving out of this screen right now, and I'm going to my browser. So let's go to Node.js. Okay, so when we started the training, I ensured that I show you how to download. All right, yeah. So I showed you how to download the Node.js. Currently, we are using the LTS version. LTS basically stands for long-term support. In case you see LTS, while you're working on probably a project or you're trying to get some things done, LTS basically stands for long-term support. This is the current version, with the latest features. Sometimes it can be buggy. Sometimes migrating to this version can cause breaking changes, as you can see. So I said, don't draw on my screen. Favor. Okay, so I'm going to disable that. Okay, so so we have version 18, and one of these days I would explain what we call semantic versioning, where you are able to understand, the difference between something having major, minor, and patch release. So the first number you're saying here is the major release, the second one is the minor release, and the third one is the patch release. I would explain that, and also explain so you understand when to migrate or when not to migrate, depending on what you're doing, basically. Right. So depending on what you're depending on why you're trying to migrate, and depending on what you're working on too. So we'll talk about that in the later class. So basically, this is Node, and Node.js is what we've been using to execute our commands, our JavaScript code off the browser, right? So JavaScript by default is meant to work only on the browser. When you have an engine, a JavaScript engine such as Node, you can then run it off the browser. So let's try to understand what we are doing with Node and what Node can do, right? So using Node, of course, you can build the backend applications, you can write your front-end applications, you can build desktop applications, and there are frameworks that make these processes easier, right? For example, building desktop applications, you have a framework like Electron, and of course, Electron, is used to build some of the tools that you are currently using. Now we have VS Code. Let's assume I check, I go down to, okay, so let me move this Zoom thing off. Okay, so let's go down to help, and then let's toggle developer tools. I'm trying to make you understand that, currently VS Code is actually built with, Node.js and Electron. So you can see that I am able to toggle developer tools, and while I move right here, you're seeing I'm inspecting VS Code, currently inspecting VS Code. So if I extract, you see, I'm able to toggle around here. Okay. So so basically you can inspect the entire code editor. And I'm just showing you so you understand that it's currently running on it currently has kind of like this browser implementation, right? So currently working with Electron, you can write when you're writing things like plugins and the rest of them, you have access to this level of implementing some things on VS Code, right? So you see we're able to show that we're currently, these are kind of like files, right? Files that are on our machine, yeah, you can also inspect the network to see what is probably coming in or going out. So let's try to see, let's try to follow through on the network. You see we have things loaded in, right? Because I clicked on extensions, we're trying to download an extension. So let's say we try to download the .env, because I think it's already downloaded. But basically, you see, all these items loading. You see network requests going in and coming in, right? Coming in. So if we try to install, these are some things I already have installed. So let's just search for Monokai. I think there's a thing called Monokai. Can't remember. So we have a dark theme. So you see things are being loaded right here. I can install, and then you see the network traffic, moving up, showing that we're currently downloading something. And yeah, I was able to open this by simply toggling the developer view. Yeah, I think that's what it's called. Developer tools. Okay, and so this is built with Electron and Node. So which means if you are able to master Node very well, you can embark on building a project like this, right? A desktop application. You can also embark on building projects like websites, where you have the websites powered by Node, right? Maybe you have like a form, you have or you want to build like a RESTful API. You can do all that with Node. And the documentation, of course, should be your first. It should be the first place you should probably go to when you have like questions, or when you want to read up what you can do here. So if you have a question, favor, please ask a question so I can proceed. Unmute yourself and ask a question.
Okay, my question is, I saw something on the net, and I want to ask, can we really use the node to host a website like live, like make it go public with node?
Yes, we can. We can. So the way it works, I think understanding how hosting and those understanding how to host applications would be the first thing here. So you can. The idea is you have a particular script or a particular file, like your HTML file, your build file, and you can use Node.js. You can create a very simple server like an Express server to render that particular file, running on a particular port, and then using a tool like Nginx, you can make that port. You can set up what to call a reverse proxy to allow that particular file or that particular localhost instance that you're currently running inside your server to be accessed by the outside world. When I mean the outside world, I mean those that are not within the server, right? So you can. And I have a couple of applications currently running on Node, right? And I think we'll definitely do that together. Let's not dive into that because it's going to take our time. But yes, you can. To answer your question, yes, you can. So, and we'll do that. Don't worry, we'll do that. So, looking at the Node.js documentation, you see we have a bunch of areas. We have a bunch of modules that you can, play around with. And we have an HTTP module. So basically, instead of using tools like Express, you can basically create an HTTP server, directly with Node. You see what I'm doing? I don't need to go through every single class. These are classes, right? We have a class for the HTTP.agent. We have another class, HTTP.client, right? And each of these classes have different methods and all that. So some are deprecated and they are marked as deprecated, meaning you shouldn't use that. It's deprecated. It might work, but probably in the next version it won't be supported. So it's always good to watch out for deprecated packages. So we have the class like the HTTP server. Once I click on that, it takes me down to the HTTP server. Though the explanations is looking cluttered, the documentation is looking very cluttered and might be misleading or confusing if you don't understand how to read through. But basically, what you might want to do most times is work with the examples, right? Read, understand what is happening here, then pick up the examples and try out some things with that. So Basically, Node.js is the engine. How do you create a new Node application and work with that application? So there's something called npm, which basically stands for Node Package Manager. Most engines like this would have package managers. You want to be able to install packages written by other people and use them instead of having to create something from scratch, right? And you should be able to use npm. We have another option. We have what we call yarn from Facebook. Facebook builds their own tool called yarn, which is a package manager as well. For Node. A lot of people love using yarn. I personally enjoy using npm, but it doesn't matter which of the options you use. I believe they have similar packages you can always install, and you can install Express using yarn install Express. npm, you use npm install Express. We're going to try something. We'll be working with npm. If you want to migrate to yarn, it's just a matter of installing the command line tool and using it. But npm comes with Node when you install Node, right? So I have Node installed, but if you don't have Node installed, go back to the website, download Node and install Node. It's straightforward. If you find it difficult to do that, let me know, or drop the message in the chat, in the Discord room, and someone will assist you. What we are going to do before we come back to the documentation, on npm, you can simply search for a package if you know what you want to search for, or you can actually explore, and try to see the list of packages we have in here. Let's search for a particular package that I know very well, which is called UUID. So let's assume I want to generate a UUID. This is the package I would use. I have to install this package in my application, call this package, and use it. But before we go ahead to do that, I think it's quite important if you also understand what you have here, right? So looking at these tags, what is the meaning of these tags we're seeing here? What are these progress bars, this sort of progress bars? What do they really mean? So the first item you're seeing, which is marked P, stands for popularity, right? I think, the M stands for maintainability, if this is currently under maintenance, and the Q stands for quality. Okay, so we also have the optimal, but I don't think we have that option showing up here. I don't think so. So basically, popularity, quality, and maintainability. As you can see, this is not really under, this is not being maintained. I mean, there's a level of maintenance there, but not as high as what you see here. And I think the reason is because this is quite straightforward, right? There's basically nothing to maintain here, except maybe there's a bug, that is discovered by, a bunch of developers. But this is just simply going to generate a UID, right? So that is why you see that the tag here is not so much for maintainability. But looking at the quality, is very good. And the popularity is very good because basically everybody is using this. So when you click on this, you see you are able to get more intel about the application or the library. It is open source, of course. That's why we have it here, and you can go directly to the GitHub repository. You can decide to fork the repository and probably work on it. Put in your code or do whatever it is you want to do in there. So it's open and you can download it. Right? We have 59 contributors. It's used by 13.9 million developers. And these are the stars and all that, all the detail about the repository. So we have the weekly downloads. We have 66 million weekly downloads. This is the current version, MIT license. This is the unpacked size. These are the previous issues, and these are the collaborators working on this. So if you also get steps on how to use it, the functionality for creation of ROFC 4122 UUIDs. UUIDs basically means universally unique identifiers. So it means when we create an identifier, it will not, it will not match with another identifier. So you can't have two IDs, colliding or being the same thing basically, right? So and there are different versions of these, version 1, 3, 4, and 5. We'll work with an example right now. We're going to follow this same steps. But before we are able to do this, we have to first create a node application. So let's go to the desktop, or let's go back into the JS workshop, and then let's create a new folder. So I'm going to say make directory Node.js app, right? So let's call this Node.js app, just like this. So let's open up Node.js app. Everything I'm doing here is just basically where is our visual? Yeah. So I'm simply going to put this together here so you can see it directly. So you see I created Node.js app, which is right here. Okay. And I'm going to simply run npm init -y. So let's take up the -y. Npm init is the command for initializing a new Node.js application, right? So it's going to ask us some series of questions. What is your package name? I can say my new Node app. If you don't put in a name and you press enter, it's going to work with the default you have here, right? So let's say my new Node app. And okay, so it says it cannot contain capsulator. Okay, that's fine. So my new Node app. Okay, so what version are we working on? 1.0.0 was the description. Just simple workshop. Entry point, what's the entry point? Index.js, which means when you run this application, that's going to be the entry point. We don't have any app, we don't have any file in there for now, but let's just set this as the default. So do we have any test command? We don't want all these git repository, no. Keywords. So I'm just hitting the enter key, and is this okay? Yes, and yeah. So now we have our new application, and basically what we have in here is a package.json file. So let's move this other files we have here into JS. I'm going to call this JS. Let's move these files into JS. Okay. All right. So inside the Node.js app, we simply have a package of JSON. Now, assuming I run the npm init -y, we would skip those questions and we just go into creating this automatically without having to answer those questions. Okay. Yeah. So -y means everything should be yes. By default. So now we have the package.json file. What is the package.json file? This is basically the file that you would use to manage, your Node.js application. Now you have like the entry points, you have the script. You can add new scripts, so that when you execute those scripts like npm this. So let's assume I had a script here. Let me close this. So let's assume I had a script here and I call this stats, right? All the stats and I need to have a comma here. Okay, so within this place I'm just simply going to call node index, right, which means I'm calling the index file. So let's create that index file, index.js, and I'm going to have console.log hello world. Okay, so back here I'm calling node index. So if I run npm stats, it's basically, basically what's going to happen is that it's going to call node index, right? So I run npm start, it automatically ran this code I have here, which is node index, and then this was executed, right? So when you also install packages, you'll be able to manage those packages from here. So looking at what we're observing the other time, if I copy this from here by just clicking, I've copied this line of code, npm install UUID. I can now go back to my coding environment, to my IDE of VS Code, and I paste this in here. This is now going to be installed, and it's going to be installed basically because we have our package.json. If you don't have this file, it's going to tell you that probably this is not a valid Node application. So let's install this right now. After installing this, you see we now have a dependency, which is the UUID that we just installed. And then, you have a folder that is created for you called node modules. And within that folder, the item that was installed is packaged up into, that node modules folder basically under the UUID. So you see, this is basically the file or the project that is going to make this UUID functional. You don't need to come in here. You don't need to really look at this. There's no point, trying to touch this or work with this directly from here, because if I go ahead and delete the node modules file, I can always install this back into my project by simply coming to the terminal and running npm install. This would install the items I have in my dependencies back into my project after deleting it, right? So you see we have this once again, we have the UUID package again. So how do we work with the UUID this time around? Well, so we have examples, of course. I love to work with the examples. You can import it this way, yeah, you can import it this way, or you can also import it this way, working with CommonJS syntax, which is what we're going to use right now. We're not using the EX6 module syntax yet, and I will teach you how to do that. But for now, we'll work with the CommonJS syntax. So let us go ahead and create import this, and I'm going to explain why do we have to use const v4. Why do we really need to do this? Basically, you can say const uuid equals require uuid, right? So by doing it this way, we are bringing in the entire package in here under this variable, right? So which means we can just say console.log uuid, and when you put in the dot notation here, you have like all the methods you can call, right? So you can call v4, that's the method, so you have to put it in this way. If I go ahead and run npm start, or maybe I can just run the file directly, node index, you see that we have a uuid value, right? This is a uuid value, right? And it's just going to generate this, and it's always unique, right? If you run this anytime, we're always going to have a unique value, so always going to have a unique value. But why was it done this way? Basically because they wanted to destructure that particular method. So you see they got in that particular method. Can we call this directly? Let's go ahead and see if we can. So now we're calling v4. Let's see what we have. All right, so there's a mistake here because I think, yeah, it is called this. Okay. All right. So, I mean, they brought in v4, but now they are bringing in v4, and they said, okay, v4 should be represented this way. What if we want to represent v4 as mav? Would that work? You see, that's still working, right? So you say, okay, import v4, but import v4 as mav, or as John, or as Do, right? Yeah, so you don't necessarily need to do that. You can also import it this way and then call it this way. This is also going to work for you, right? So that's the point, right? We're able to use a very simple module or a very simple package that we installed, from npm. We have just 8 minutes left. So I would have really loved us to, implement something, using Node. We're going to do that. I would arrange for a different session. We have a prototyping series that I want us to, roll out. So we already had, one version the other day. I want us to keep having the prototyping series where we're going to be building different types of application. We'll work with HTTP. Going back to that example that you saw on the browser, on the documentation, you can simply, take this whole item, put it in here, and this is going to work. This is going to create a very simple server for us, not with Express, right? Not with Express, but a very simple, HTTP server. And this is a default. We have some packages that are default with Node, so you don't necessarily need to install them, right? Some of those packages are just default with Node, and then you can extend this by adding some sort of what we call endpoints. So endpoint is to say, okay, when I visit /this, do this. When I visit /that, do that. Of course, you can always check out the documentation, to grab more details on that, on those kind of details, or on those kind of scenarios. We have a bunch of things you can do. You can start a new server and append all these details, like the header, and yeah. So let's pick this for example. This is going to basically give us a server, and yeah, and our server, when we run this server, this server is going to run on port 8000. Let me run this on port 3000. So if I say node index, this is going to run a server, and now this server is running. We don't have any details showing up here, but it's running. How do we test to see that this server is running? If I go to Postman, or even on my web browser, but let's do that with Postman. So if I come down to if I come down to the backend engineering workshop, and I'm going to teach you Postman in a different video, a different session. We'll just work on just Postman, okay? So if I come in here and I say localhost 3000, and I run this, this is basically going to just tell us, okay, right? Which was the message we're sending here. As you can see, response of end, okay. So you can say welcome to our server, right? So let's save this, let's close and run again. Okay, so let's do that again. You see, welcome to our server. Okay, so we are not going to be, building a lot with, HTTP. We have frameworks that have made this process easier, such as Express, Quad.js, a lot of frameworks out there, a whole lot of frameworks. We'll be working with Express.js, and, this is the same process we follow if we want to do something, using Express.js. All we have to do is to navigate to Express.js. Probably pick up a couple of examples, but I'm going to teach you Express.js on its own and how to use it. But if we just go ahead to the Hello World program, for example, see we have a very simple Hello World program right here. I'm just going to pick that up, drop it in here, and then install Express, because Express is not a default package with Node. I'm going to say npm I Express. This is going to install Express. So now that we're installing Express, we have the default endpoint here, which is to say, okay, we have slash. We can also say slash user, for example, or we can say slash generate ID. And whenever you call generate ID, we want to call v4, and we want to import that v4 the way we did it the other time. So I'm simply going to copy this, paste it. I'm going to call this v4, right? And then in here, I'm going to say we want v4 from UUID. Express is still installed. Oh yeah, sorry. Express. Express. Okay, so let's install. All right, so now we have Express installed. Let's go ahead and run this file again. And now it's telling us that this is running on port 3000, and that we have both. This is, if we call the entry points, which is just like this, it's going to tell us hello world, right? So what you've seen here, this is going to tell us, hello world, and you can see we have hello world. If we run slash generate ID, it's basically going to generate an ID, and then return that ID for us in here. So you see that ID is returned in here. So, and I will teach you how to, I will explain every single part, request, response. We're going to, build applications, and you see how easy it is, to build some kind of applications. When things are, when you're starting out, it might be difficult for you to grab some things. Always ask questions. We'll cover those areas in the next workshop we have. We're going to cover, Express. We're going to talk about Postman. Most especially focusing on Postman. And yeah, finally, I think I wanted to make you understand the NVM. So NVM is basically a tool which is called, is basically Node Version Manager, right? So you use NVM to manage the versions of Node. So I can have multiple versions of Node installed on my laptop, and I can work with any version, at any given time, right? So it's basically a Node Version Manager, and all you have to do is install it. I already have this installed on my laptop, but following this process, you can install it, and you don't really need this right now. But when you're building applications or you're working on other tools application, you discover that sometimes the versions they use is not the same version you used, and you want to switch your versions, right? So on my laptop, I'm currently using this version 14. But because I have NVM installed, I can just say NVM install 16. I think I already have 16 installed. So yeah, I have 16 installed. So I can simply say nvm use 16, and I'm automatically using version 16, right, in this project, right? So if I say nvm, okay, let's go back. If I say nvm, if I say node version, you see I'm currently using 16. So we'll look at this in the next session. We don't have much time. We just have 1 minute left, on this call. And I hope I was able to, at least make you understand some basic things. I know I rushed through some things, but yes, we are going to look at, you can take a look at, the NVM link here. But I don't think you need this right now. We'll get to the stage where we'll also make you understand this better. I just wanted you to understand, you can manage different versions of Node on your laptop. I talked about NPM, which is the package manager. And then, the Node documentation, which we're going to be using as we proceed. We're going to be coming here to pick up some, vital information. And most of the things I would explain to you, I'll pick up the explanation from the documentation. And in the next session, we're going to focus on Express and Postman, right? Express and Postman. And hopefully we would have this session. I'm looking at tomorrow or next, right? I'm trying to create this, extra sessions so that we can really move fast, okay? So I hope you had a wonderful time. This meeting is ending in less than a minute. So if you have any question, drop your question in the Discord room, and I would answer you right there. So have a wonderful day, guys, and bye-bye. Enjoy yourselves. Okay.